He let the Apache girl step into his tent to escape the cold, but faced a shocking surprise. The winter night had settled over the plains like a heavy cold blanket. Snow covered every inch of the ground, and the wind howled through the trees, shaking the branches like rattles. John pulled his thick coat tighter around himself and took another careful step through the snow. Each step sank slightly, and the cold bit through his boots. He had traveled these lands many times before, but even a seasoned frontiersman like him could not ignore the cruelty of a winter night like this one. John had set up a small campsite just off the main trail. His tent was simple, made of heavy canvas, and it flapped in the wind as he checked the fire he had built earlier. The fire provided some warmth, but the wind was relentless, and he could feel the cold seeping into his bones. He pulled his woolen gloves higher, trying to warm his fingers as he arranged the logs to keep the fire burning steadily. The night was quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the occasional whistle of the wind. John's eyes scanned the horizon, alert for any movement. He was used to traveling alone, but he always kept a careful watch, especially in harsh weather like this. Survival depended on being prepared for anything. Then, just beyond the circle of firelight, something caught his eye. At first he thought it might be an animal, perhaps a fox or a stray dog wandering through the snow. But as he focused, he realized it was a small figure, moving slowly and carefully. It was a girl, no more than 12 or 13, dressed in thin clothes that were clearly not enough for the freezing night. She moved as if she were trying to stay out of sight, her small frame shivering with cold. John's heart went out to her immediately. He had seen many travelers struggle in these winters, and he knew how dangerous it could be for someone so young and alone. He could imagine the frost forming on her hair, the cold turning her lips blue, and the snow threatening to slow her down until she could no longer move. A decision had to be made quickly. He hesitated for a moment, thinking of the dangers. Allowing strangers into a campsite could be risky. People were unpredictable, and he had heard stories of travelers being robbed or harmed even in the wilderness. But looking at her now, he saw fear and desperation that outweighed any caution. She wasn't dangerous. She was simply a child, lost and trying to survive. "Hey," John called softly, keeping his voice calm and gentle. "It's cold out there. You can come in and warm yourself by the fire." The girl froze at the sound of his voice, her wide eyes showing both fear and surprise. She hesitated, glancing toward the fire and back at the darkness. The wind whipped her hair across her face, and she pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she took a cautious step forward, her movements slow and careful as if unsure whether she could trust him. John kept his gaze steady but soft. "It's all right. I won't hurt you. You need warmth. Come closer." The girl's lips quivered, and she nodded slightly before stepping fully into the light of the fire. Her face was pale, and her eyes reflected exhaustion. Snowflakes clung to her hair and clothes, and her small hands were red and raw from the cold. John immediately grabbed a thick blanket from inside the tent and draped it around her shoulders. "There," he said gently. "That will help a little. Sit by the fire. You'll feel warmer soon." She sank onto a log near the fire, her teeth chattering softly. John handed her a piece of bread he had saved from his supplies, and she took it with shaking hands. She didn't speak at first, only nibbling at the bread while glancing nervously around. John could tell she had been on the move for a long time. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her small boots wet with snow. He could see bruises on her arms, faint and faded, but enough to tell he wasn't imagining the signs of hardship. "You've been traveling for a while, haven't you?" John asked, keeping his voice calm, not wanting to frighten her. She nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the fire. I got lost," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost afraid to be heard, but there was a strange determination in her gaze, as if she had been surviving on her own for some time. John felt a mix of concern and admiration. Surviving alone at her age, in such harsh weather, was no small feat. He handed her a cup of warm water, which she accepted with trembling hands. "Drink slowly," he said. You need to warm up, but don't gulp too fast or you'll get sick." She obeyed quietly, taking small sips and letting the warmth spread through her body. John watched her carefully, noting how her fingers began to regain some color, and how her breathing, though still uneven, became slightly calmer. He wanted to ask her where she was from, who she was with, but he also knew that pushing her too hard could make her withdraw. She needed to feel safe first. The wind outside howled even louder now, rattling the tent and making the fire flicker. John adjusted the canvas flaps, making sure the warmth stayed inside as much as possible. The girl huddled closer to the fire, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames. For a moment, silence passed between them, filled only with the sounds of the storm outside. Then John spoke again, softly. "You don't have to be afraid here. You're safe. I know the cold can be harsh, but I've been through many winters like this. You'll be all right as long as you stay near the fire." The girl nodded again, her lips trembling slightly, but she didn't speak. John respected her silence. Sometimes words were too much when one had been through fear and hardship. He took a seat on the other side of the fire, keeping an eye on her and the tent. He thought about the night ahead, how long the storm might last, and how he would make sure she stayed warm and safe. As the minutes passed, he started talking quietly about small things, about the stars above, the way snowflakes formed unique patterns, the quiet beauty of the plains in winter. The girl listened, her eyes gradually lifting from the fire to meet his. There was a flicker of curiosity, a small connection forming between them. By now, John could see that the girl was more than just cold and tired. She carried a weight of fear and loneliness that went deeper than the winter night. And yet, despite everything, she had kept moving, kept surviving, and had somehow found her way to his campsite. John realized that he had made the right decision. Letting her step into the tent was not just an act of kindness. It might have been the difference between life and death. He felt a deep sense of responsibility for her now, knowing that the night was far from over and that the storm would not ease its grip anytime soon. As the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, John and the girl sat together in the small warmth of the tent. Neither spoke much, but an unspoken trust began to grow between them. For the first time in hours, the girl's shivering slowed, and she began to feel the faint relief of safety. And though John did not yet know what challenges the night would bring, he knew one thing for certain. He could not leave her out in the cold. He had promised warmth, and he would keep that promise no matter what. Outside, the snow continued to fall thick and heavy, covering the plains in a silent white blanket. Inside the small tent, a fragile moment of warmth and trust had begun to take root, a moment that neither John nor the girl would forget, no matter what the storm held for them. The girl huddled closer to the fire, still wrapped in the thick blanket John had given her. She stared silently into the flames, her small hands clasped tightly around her knees. John could see how exhausted she was, but he also noticed the determination in her eyes. She had endured much more than most children her age, and it showed in the quiet way she observed everything around her. John shifted slightly on his log, careful not to startle her. "Do you have a name?" he asked gently, keeping his voice calm.
The girl hesitated.
Her eyes darted toward the canvas walls of the tent, as if she were thinking about how much to trust him. Finally, she whispered, "Ayana." John nodded. "Ayana. That's a beautiful name. I'm John." He extended his hand slowly. She looked at it, then at him, and finally gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't force the handshake. It was enough that she had said her name. He studied her carefully. Her clothes were thin and torn, her boots soaked through with snow. Even under the thick blanket, he could see that she had been exposed to the cold for a long time. He thought about how far she must have traveled and how she had managed to survive alone. There was no doubt in his mind she needed more than just warmth. She needed food, rest, and care. John reached into his pack and pulled out a small tin of dried meat and some hard bread. He handed it to Ayana, who took it with trembling hands. "Eat slowly," he said. "You'll need your strength if you are going to stay warm through the night." She nodded and nibbled at the bread cautiously. Her small fingers shook as she took the meat, but soon she began to eat more steadily. John watched her, relieved that she was finally taking some nourishment. It was clear that she had not eaten properly in a long time. The wind outside continued to howl, shaking the tent. John adjusted the flaps and added more logs to the fire. Sparks flew up into the air, and he noticed the way Ayana's eyes followed them, fascinated by the small, dancing lights. For a moment, he allowed himself a quiet thought. The harshness of the wilderness made even simple things seem magical to someone who had endured so much.
"Where are you from?" John asked softly, careful not to pressure her.
Ayana's lips pressed together, and she shook her head slightly. I can't say," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost fearful. John nodded slowly. He didn't push. Trust had to be earned, especially from someone who had clearly experienced danger. "That's all right. You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to," he said. "Right now, we just need to keep you warm and safe." The girl's eyes met his for a brief moment. He could see a mixture of relief and caution there, a young mind trying to understand a world that had been harsh and unforgiving. John felt a surge of protectiveness. He had spent many winters alone, but he had never felt such responsibility for someone so fragile and young. As the fire crackled, John began to think about the night ahead. The wind was not likely to die down, and the snow would continue to fall. The cold would make it difficult for both of them to rest, but he knew they needed to try. He reached for his small water flask and offered some to Ayana. She accepted it with a hesitant nod, taking small sips and letting the warmth spread through her body. "You're doing very well," he said quietly. "You've been very brave to come this far on your own." Ayana looked down, embarrassed by the praise. She had learned long ago that showing weakness could be dangerous, but she could not help the small smile that touched her lips. For the first time that night, John saw a hint of the child she truly was, beneath the fear and the cold. Minutes passed, and the storm outside grew fiercer. The wind rattled the tent, and snow piled up against the canvas walls. John kept a careful watch, adjusting the flaps and moving logs to keep the fire steady. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him. Ayana had trusted him, and he could not let her down. "Do you have anyone with you?" he asked gently, trying once more to learn more about her situation. Ayana shook her head.
I was alone,"
she whispered. Her voice trembled slightly. "I didn't know where to go. I just walked." John nodded, understanding the fear and courage it took to survive alone in such a harsh environment.
"You made it here, though," he said.
"And now you're safe. That's what matters right now." She looked up at him, her eyes wide. For a moment he saw a flicker of something else. Trust, fragile but growing. It was a small victory in a night filled with uncertainty. John reached into his pack again and pulled out a thick woolen scarf. "Here, wrap this around your neck. It will help keep you warmer."
Ayana accepted it carefully, winding it around herself.
She shivered less now, the warmth from the fire and the blanket helping her regain some strength. John could see that she was beginning to relax, though the exhaustion in her body was still evident. He decided to tell her a story to help take her mind off the cold and the storm. "When I was a boy," he began, "I traveled with my father across these plains. We faced storms like this one, but we also saw incredible things. The stars above us, the way the snow sparkles, and the quiet of the world when everyone else is asleep. It's a strange kind of beauty, even in the cold." Ayana listened quietly, her eyes fixed on the fire as she imagined the stories he told. The mention of stars and snow seemed to capture her attention, and for a moment, the fear in her eyes softened. "The plains can be dangerous," John continued, "but they can also teach you things about yourself. You learn to be brave, to keep going even when it's hard. You've already shown that kind of courage tonight." She looked at him, and he could see the smallest flicker of pride in her expression. Praise had been rare in her life, and even simple words of encouragement seemed to warm her almost as much as the fire. The hours passed slowly. John kept an eye on Ayana, watching as she huddled closer to the fire and finally closed her eyes for a few moments of rest. The storm outside showed no sign of easing, but inside the tent, a small sense of safety had begun to grow. John thought about the journey that had brought her here, and the danger she must have faced. He realized that the night was far from over, and that unexpected challenges might still come. But for now it was enough to know that she was alive, that she was safe, and that she had a place to rest for a while. As the fire crackled and the wind howled, John felt a quiet sense of responsibility. He could not let this night end in tragedy. He would keep watch, adjust the fire, and make sure that Ayanna survived until morning. And perhaps in doing so, he would find a sense of purpose in the small acts of kindness that made such a difference in a cold, harsh world. Ayanna stirred slightly, opening her eyes and looking at him. "Thank you," she whispered. John smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me. We're going to get through this night together." For the first time since he had seen her in the snow, he felt a connection forming. It was fragile, uncertain, but real. The storm outside was harsh, but inside the small tent a spark of trust, care, and warmth had begun to take root. And John knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them, not alone, but with Ayanna by his side. The night stretched on, the storm raging outside, but inside the tent, two strangers shared the warmth of a small fire, the quiet trust of human kindness, and the fragile hope that they would survive the night together. The night dragged on, and the storm outside grew stronger. The wind rattled the tent canvas, and snow pressed hard against the sides, making the tent sway slightly with each gust. John stayed alert, watching the fire and occasionally glancing at Ayanna. She had fallen asleep a while ago, her small body curled up in the blanket, but he could see her lips trembling slightly in her sleep from the cold that still lingered. John was careful not to disturb her. He knew that even with the fire, the night would be long and dangerous. The cold outside was merciless, and he had to make sure they both stayed safe until the morning light. As he sat quietly, he thought about how fragile life could be, and how quickly everything could change. One wrong step, one misjudgment, and the night could have ended very differently. He moved closer to the fire to warm himself, trying not to make too much noise. His mind wandered back to Ayanna's story, or rather, the little she had shared. She had been traveling alone, lost in the snow, and she had not spoken about her family or home. Something in her eyes told him that she had seen danger, that she had learned to rely on herself for survival. And yet here she was, trusting him enough to accept his help, even if only a little. John's eyes shifted to the corner of the tent, and something caught his attention. There was a faint movement, something small and hidden beneath the folds of Ayanna's blanket. He froze, not wanting to startle her, but curiosity and a rising sense of caution made him look closer. He leaned slightly and carefully lifted a corner of the blanket. To his surprise, there was a tiny bundle nestled close to her chest. At first, he could not tell what it was. His heart skipped a beat as he realized it was a newborn baby, swaddled in rags that were almost as thin as Ayanna's own clothes. The baby was barely moving, its skin pale and its small body shivering uncontrollably from the cold. John's mind raced. He had expected many things when he let her into the tent, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. He swallowed hard and gently cleared his throat so as not to alarm Ayanna.
"Ayanna, is there something you want to tell me?" he asked softly, his voice calm but firm. Ayanna stirred at his words and opened her eyes, her gaze falling on him.
There was a flicker of fear, then relief. Slowly she lifted the bundle, holding it closer to herself. "I found it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It was alone in the snow. I couldn't leave it there." John's heart ached as he looked at the baby. It was small, fragile, and in desperate need of warmth and care. He realized immediately that the night had become more complicated. Not only did he have to protect Ayanna, but now he was responsible for the life of this newborn child as well. He reached out cautiously. "Let me help," he said gently. "We need to get it warm. You can help me, but we need to be careful." Ayanna nodded, her eyes wide but trusting. She handed the baby to him, and he wrapped it in an extra blanket, holding it close to his chest. He could feel the tiny body trembling against him, and he knew that without immediate warmth, the baby might not survive the night. John quickly adjusted the fire, moving logs and adding smaller pieces of wood to create a more consistent heat. Sparks flew, and he carefully shielded the baby from the occasional flare. He handed Ayana another blanket and instructed her to wrap herself more tightly, then encouraged her to stay close to the fire but not too close.
"We have to be careful," he explained.
"The baby needs the heat, but we must keep it safe." Ayana helped as best as she could, her small hands trembling but determined. She gently held the blanket around the baby while John kept it close to the fire, balancing warmth and safety. The baby's small face was pale and red at the same time, and John could see the faint rise and fall of its tiny chest. Every breath it took seemed so fragile, so important. As the minutes passed, John realized that they would have to work together if the baby was going to survive. He whispered instructions to Ayana, explaining how to keep the baby wrapped, how to make sure it stayed warm, and how to gently rub its hands and feet to encourage circulation. She listened carefully, doing exactly as he said, her focus completely on the child. The storm outside showed no sign of slowing down. The wind screamed through the plains, and snow pressed hard against the tent, but inside a small world of warmth and determination had formed. John and Ayana worked silently together, both focused on the delicate task before them. He felt a deep respect for her courage. Despite her age, she had faced the cold, the snow, and the responsibility of protecting another life, and she had not faltered. Hours seemed to pass in a blur. John kept one eye on the fire and one on the baby, occasionally checking Ayana to make sure she was not freezing herself. He spoke softly to the baby, murmuring words of encouragement, telling it to stay strong and warm. He could feel the small heartbeat under his hands, and each beat filled him with a mix of relief and urgency. Ayana finally spoke, her voice trembling but steady. "Do you think it will be okay?" she asked. John looked at her, his expression serious but reassuring.
"I think it will," he said. "We're doing everything we can."
"It's strong, and you're helping. That makes a difference." Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. She kept her hands on the blanket, feeling the warmth and life of the baby she had found. In that moment, John realized that trust had grown between them. She had trusted him to help, and he had trusted her to care. Together they had formed a small bond that went beyond words. The night dragged on, and the storm raged outside, but slowly, very slowly, the baby began to respond to the warmth. Its trembling lessened, and the rise and fall of its tiny chest became steadier. John and Ayana exchanged small glances, relief passing between them silently. The danger had not passed completely, but they had made progress, and that progress was everything in a night like this. John spoke quietly to Ayana again.
"You did well," he said. "You stayed calm, and you kept the baby safe."
"That's not easy at all." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "I couldn't leave it out there." John nodded, understanding completely. "You saved it, and now we have to keep it safe until morning. That's our job together." The hours passed slowly, but the baby's condition improved. John and Ayana took turns keeping it close to the fire, wrapping and unwrapping the blankets carefully to maintain warmth without letting it get too hot. They whispered quietly to each other, their voices soft against the roar of the wind outside. By the time the storm began to ease slightly in the early hours of the morning, the baby was stable enough to rest comfortably, swaddled in warm blankets and safe in John's arms. Ayana leaned against the fire, exhausted but relieved. She looked at John, and for the first time she smiled fully, a genuine expression of trust and gratitude. John felt a sense of accomplishment and deep responsibility. The night had been long and filled with unexpected challenges, but they had faced it together. The storm outside was still fierce, but inside the small tent, a fragile sense of hope had taken root. "You did something very brave tonight," John said softly. "Not many children could have done what you did. You protected that baby, even in the freezing cold."
Ayanna looked down, still holding the blanket around the baby.
I had to, she said. I couldn't leave it. John nodded, understanding the depth of her courage. He realized that the night had changed both of them. They had come together in a moment of danger and fear, and in doing so, had formed a bond that would carry them through whatever lay ahead. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the snow-covered plains, John felt a small sense of relief. The storm was dying down, and for the first time in hours, he allowed himself to breathe more easily. The baby was safe. Ayanna was alive, and together they had survived a night that had seemed impossible. John knew that the day ahead would bring more challenges, but for now he allowed himself a quiet moment to appreciate the small victories of the night. The baby stirred slightly in the blankets, and Ayanna reached out to touch its tiny hand, a look of wonder and care on her face. The night had been long, frightening, and filled with unexpected surprises, but through it all, John, Ayanna, and the baby had survived. And in that survival they had discovered something even more important: the power of trust, courage, and human kindness in the face of the harshest conditions. The first rays of dawn barely reached the snow-covered plains, but even this faint light was enough to reveal how deep the storm had been. Snow lay in thick layers on the ground, glinting like tiny crystals under the pale light. John knew that the night had been only the beginning of their struggle. Even though the storm had lessened, the cold was still bitter, and the journey ahead would be dangerous for both Ayanna and the newborn. John adjusted the blankets around the baby once more and looked at Ayanna. Her small frame shivered slightly, though the warmth from the fire and blankets had helped her regain some strength. Her eyes were wide and alert, and she looked up at him with a mixture of curiosity and determination. Despite the long night, she had not lost her spirit. "We need to move carefully," John said softly. "The snow is deep, and the cold can be unforgiving. We'll have to stay close to the fire while we get ready to travel. Can you manage that?" Ayanna nodded, her lips pressed together, showing her determination. "Yes," she whispered. "I can do it."
I want to help the baby.
John felt a swell of pride. The child had endured so much already, and yet she showed courage beyond her years. He had always known that survival was not only about strength, but about determination and intelligence. Ayanna had both, and he realized she would be an invaluable companion in the struggle ahead. He carefully lifted the baby and checked that the blankets were wrapped snugly. The baby's tiny fingers moved slightly, and John could feel its faint warmth returning. "We need to keep it close," he said. "Any sudden movement or exposure to the cold could be dangerous." The girl helped him gather supplies. They packed the remaining food, a few extra blankets, and John's small water flask. Every movement was slow and careful, as if they were moving through a fragile world where even the smallest mistake could have serious consequences. John taught Ayanna how to distribute the weight of the supplies so that neither of them would tire too quickly. She watched and followed his instructions carefully, clearly eager to do everything right. Once they were ready, John led them out of the tent, carefully stepping through the snow. He made sure the baby remained warm, holding it close under his coat, while Ayanna followed, wrapped in thick blankets. The cold air stung their faces, but John knew that movement would help keep them warm. He glanced at Ayanna and nodded. "Keep up and stay close," he said. The plain stretched out before them, wide and white, with no signs of human habitation in sight. John scanned the horizon for any sign of shelter or a safe path. He had learned to read the land, and he knew that small rises or tree clusters could provide some protection from the wind. He carefully guided Ayanna toward a small rise, where the snow was slightly less deep and they could rest for a moment. Ayanna stumbled slightly in the snow, and John reached out to steady her. "Be careful," he said softly. "The snow can hide holes and slippery patches. Watch each step." She nodded, gripping his hand lightly for support. Her face was pale from the cold, but her eyes were focused and alert. John admired her resilience. The child had survived alone for so long, yet she moved forward now, trusting him completely. They paused at the small rise, and John took a moment to adjust the baby's position. He whispered softly to calm it, and the tiny creature slowly relaxed again. Ayanna watched him, her eyes wide with concern and wonder. "It feels so small," she said. "How can something so tiny survive this cold?" John smiled gently. "It's fragile, yes, but life is strong. We just have to give it warmth, care, and patience. That's all it needs to survive." They continued on their journey, moving carefully through the snow. John led the way, breaking a path through the deep drifts, while Ayanna followed closely, keeping the baby wrapped tightly. Each step was exhausting, but neither of them complained. Survival required focus and determination, and both had learned the importance of perseverance. Hours passed, and the wind began to pick up again. Snowflakes swirled around them, and visibility grew poor. John knew that they needed to find shelter soon, or the cold could become dangerous. He scanned the horizon and spotted a small grove of trees in the distance. Though the trees offered only partial protection, it was better than nothing. They made their way to the grove, moving slowly to avoid slipping on ice hidden beneath the snow. Once inside, John built a small fire using twigs and branches he collected. He carefully shielded it from the wind, using larger pieces of wood and snowbanks. The baby was kept close to the warmth, and Ayanna helped by holding a blanket over the small fire to trap heat. John could see that Ayanna was tired. Her movements were slower, and her breathing was heavy. He knelt beside her. "You need to rest," he said softly. "We'll take turns keeping watch and keeping the baby warm. You can't do it all alone." She shook her head stubbornly.
"I want to help," she said. "I can do it."
"I won't let the baby get cold." John smiled faintly, touched by her determination, but he knew he had to insist. "We'll do it together," he said, "but even the strongest need rest. You won't be any good to the baby if you collapse from exhaustion." Finally, Ayanna nodded reluctantly. John helped her settle down near the fire, wrapping her tightly in blankets while he kept the baby close to his chest. The warmth from the fire slowly eased the tension in her body, and she closed her eyes for a few moments of much-needed rest. John stayed awake, keeping the fire steady and watching the baby. He whispered quietly to it, soothing the tiny creature with calm words and gentle movements. Each small rise and fall of its chest reassured him that they were surviving, that his careful attention and Ayanna's determination were keeping life alive. As the day passed, the storm outside began to calm. The wind died down, leaving only a soft fall of snow around the grove. John allowed himself a moment of relief. They had survived the night, and now they had a chance to rest, recover, and plan the next stage of their journey. Ayanna stirred and opened her eyes. She looked at John, her expression tired but determined. "Is it safe?" she asked. John nodded. "For now," he said. "We have shelter and the baby is warm. We'll rest a little, then figure out the safest way to continue." She reached out to touch the baby gently. "I'm glad it's alive," she whispered. I didn't think it would survive the night." John smiled. "You helped it survive. That's the most important thing. Your care and courage made the difference." The rest of the day passed slowly, with John and Ayanna taking turns keeping the baby warm and watching the small fire. They shared what little food they had, and John taught Ayanna how to ration it carefully. They spoke quietly to each other, sharing small stories to keep their spirits up. By evening, Ayanna had regained some strength, and John could see that her small body was recovering from the exhaustion of the previous night. The baby was stable, and the fire continued to provide warmth against the cold air. The grove, though not a permanent shelter, had given them a temporary safe haven. John knew that they would eventually need to reach a larger settlement, somewhere the baby and Ayanna could receive proper care. But for now, they had survived the worst of the storm, and that survival had strengthened their bond. They had faced a night of unexpected challenges and come through together, proving that courage, trust, and care could overcome even the harshest conditions. As darkness fell again over the plains, John and Ayanna settled near the fire. The baby was wrapped snugly in blankets and sleeping peacefully. Ayanna leaned against the warmth of the fire, her eyes reflecting the small flames. John sat nearby, watching over both of them, feeling a quiet pride in their determination and resilience. The struggle for survival was far from over, But they had taken the first crucial steps together, and in that struggle John realized that even in the harshest conditions, hope, courage, and human kindness could create a small but powerful force against the cold and danger of the world outside. Morning broke slowly over the snow-covered plains. The soft light of dawn made the ice crystals on the trees and ground sparkle like tiny diamonds. The storm had finally passed, leaving a quiet, white world behind. The wind had softened to a gentle whisper, and the sharp bite of the previous nights was now a manageable cold. John looked around the grove where they had taken shelter, grateful for the temporary safety it had provided. Ayanna stirred first, opening her eyes slowly. Her face was pale but rested, and the blankets had kept her warm through the night. She looked down at the baby nestled in John's arms, still sleeping peacefully, and her expression softened into one of relief. "It's still alive," she whispered, almost to herself. "I can't believe it." John smiled faintly. "Yes," he said, "it's alive, and that's what matters. You helped it survive. Your courage and care made the difference." Ayanna's small hands trembled slightly as she reached toward the baby, touching its tiny fingers with gentle awe. "I never thought I could do something so important," she admitted. I just wanted it to live." John nodded, understanding completely. "Sometimes life puts responsibility in unexpected ways," he said. "You took it on bravely. That's something to be proud of." He looked at the baby, then at Ayanna, and finally turned his gaze to the horizon. The plains stretched endlessly before them, white and untouched. He knew that they could not stay here forever. They needed to find a settlement, or at least someone who could care for the child properly. He also knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, even with the storm behind them. "Are you ready to move?" he asked gently, watching Ayanna's reaction. She nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "Yes," she said. "We can do it together." John handed the baby to her carefully. "Hold it close. Keep it wrapped in the blankets. I'll go ahead and find the safest path." Ayanna held the tiny bundle as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. Her eyes reflected both responsibility and love, and John could see that the bond between them had grown stronger through the night. He led the way, stepping carefully through the deep snow while Ayanna followed, keeping the baby warm and close. The journey was slow. The snow was still deep and icily hidden beneath the surface, making each step dangerous. John moved with care, breaking a path through the snow while Ayanna followed closely, watching every step he took. He kept talking to her in a calm voice, giving instructions and encouragement. "Watch your step here," he said. "The snow can hide holes and rocks. Keep the baby steady." Ayanna obeyed carefully, her small hands holding the blankets tightly around the baby. She stumbled once, but John caught her arm gently and steadied her. "Thank you," she whispered, a small smile appearing on her lips despite the cold and exhaustion. They moved through the plains for hours, stopping occasionally to rest and let the baby warm in the blankets near the fire John managed to create from small, dry twigs and wood he had saved. Every time they stopped, John checked the baby, adjusting the blankets and making sure it was safe and warm. Ayanna watched closely, learning from him and following his instructions without question. During one rest stop, John looked around carefully. In the distance, he spotted a small wisp of smoke rising from behind a ridge. He squinted hopeful. "Do you see that?" he asked. Ayanna nodded, her eyes lighting up. "Is it people?" she asked, her voice trembling with excitement. John nodded slowly. "BS. That's a settlement. We need to be careful, but it looks like someone is nearby. That could be our chance to get help for the baby." They adjusted their course toward the smoke, moving cautiously to avoid slipping or attracting unnecessary attention. John wanted to make sure they reached safety without any additional danger. Ayanna held the baby tightly, her small face focused and determined. The bond between them had grown stronger than ever through the trials of the night, and now they were moving toward hope together. As they drew closer, John could see the outlines of simple cabins in the clearing. Surrounded by fences and small farm animals, smoke rose steadily from the chimneys, promising warmth and safety. He felt a surge of relief. They had survived the storm, cared for the baby, and now had a chance to ensure its future. They approached carefully, and a few people stepped outside, startled by their sudden appearance. John spoke quickly but calmly. "Please, we need help. There's a baby, very young, and a child with me. We've been traveling through the storm. Can you help us?" The people immediately understood the urgency. They gestured for John and Ayanna to follow them inside one of the cabins. The warmth hit them instantly, and the baby stirred slightly, comforted by the change in temperature. John and Ayanna handed the baby to the adults, who took over gently, checking its condition and preparing to care for it properly. Ayanna watched with awe as the adults wrapped the baby in warm blankets, fed it, and checked its small body for signs of cold or injury. She felt a mixture of relief and pride. John turned to her. "You did everything right," he said. "Look at it now. It's safe because of you." Ayanna smiled, her eyes bright despite exhaustion. I didn't do it alone," she said softly. "You helped too." John nodded. "We did it together. That's the most important thing. But now it's time to let others help. You've earned a rest." The adults offered them food, hot tea, and a place to sleep. Ayanna settled in, still holding the blankets close, but her eyes reflected trust and comfort. John watched her, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. The night had been long and difficult, filled with cold, danger, and uncertainty. But in the end, kindness, courage, and determination had carried them through. Over the next few hours, the baby continued to improve under the care of the adults. Ayanna watched fascinated and relieved as it began to stir more, its tiny cries growing stronger and steadier. She felt a sense of pride, knowing that she had been part of saving this tiny life. John stood by the cabin door, looking out at the plains. The snow was still deep, but the storm was gone. The morning light reflected on the white landscape, turning it into a scene of beauty after the harshness of the night. He thought about the events that had brought him and Ayanna together: the storm, the cold, the desperate need to survive. He realized that even in the most difficult times, human courage and kindness could create hope. Ayanna approached him slowly, her small hands clasped together.
"Thank you," she said again.
"I don't know what would have happened without you." John smiled. "You helped as much as I did," he said. "You were brave, careful, and caring. That made all the difference." They spent the rest of the day recovering, sharing stories, and slowly regaining strength. Ayanna began to smile more, and her spirit, which had been tested so harshly the night before, seemed to return. She watched the baby, now calm and warm, and felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt for a long time. As evening approached, John prepared to continue his journey, but he knew that the hardest part of the night was over. The storm had tested them, but it had also shown them what human courage, trust, and compassion could achieve. Ayanna had survived, the baby had survived, and he had been part of a small miracle. Before leaving, he knelt beside Ayanna. "Remember," he said softly, "you are stronger than you think. The night was hard, but you faced it and helped save a life. That is something to always remember." Ayanna nodded, a small confident smile on her face. "I will," she said, "and I will never forget you either." John watched her, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The world outside was still harsh and cold, but inside that small cabin, warmth, hope, and kindness had triumphed. The storm was over, but the lessons of courage, trust, and compassion would remain with both of them forever. As he stepped outside into the snowy plains, John looked back one last time at Ayanna and the baby. He knew they were safe now, in good hands, and that their lives would continue with hope. He turned and walked away, carrying with him the memory of a long night where small acts of care and courage had made all the difference. The plains were quiet once more, covered in white snow, reflecting the rising sun. The storm had passed, but the story of survival, trust, and human kindness would remain, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, hope could shine through.